Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today. I'm Jamey, that's Dave, that's Heath. We're taking a look at the wide receiver rankings for week number 6. And Heath, you said we got some good news, right? Terry McLaurin showing up at practice, so he might be able to play?
Terry McLaurin showing up at practice. I don't know what he's done at practice. He may just be there watching. I think he's wearing a uniform. Hopefully he practices in full. That would make me feel much better about ranking Jaden Daniels.
All right, so we do not have Terry McLaurin ranked. We also don't have a few other wide receivers that are still dealing with injury. CeeDee Lamb, for example, Ricky Pearsall, not expected to play. Juwan Jennings also still dealing with an injury. And no Darius Slayton expected to play tonight. But he would not be in the top 12. Here's the top 12, what we're looking at here. Puka Nacua continues to dominate. Jackson Smith and the Jigba obviously off to a great start. Jamar Chase still at number 4. Dave, do we still feel great about Jamar Chase? Where do we come out with the Joe Flacco news now that he's going to be the starter?
I'm a little more optimistic about both Chase and Tee Higgins with Joe Flacco at quarterback. Not that he throws a laser football or anything like that, but just the simple fact that he is a YOLO quarterback who is willing to challenge downfield. He doesn't seem to be flustered too much by pass rush pressure, and he knows he's got 2 good wide receivers to throw to. I think the balls will be better placed coming from Flacco than they were from Jake Browning.
Let's see the list 13 through 24 as we continue to cycle through the wide receiver rankings, and then we can go right to 24 to 36. But on this list is where we get one of the toughest players to rank for at least the 2 of you guys, and that's Garrett Wilson. So, Heath, I'll give you the first word. How do we think Wilson's going to do against this tough Denver secondary?
Well, if I knew for sure, he wouldn't be the most difficult player to rank. But what I will say is the reason it's so hard is because Garrett Wilson's a top 5 wide receiver this year. He's number 3 in target share. He's the only guy Justin Fields wants to throw to. And he's facing Pat Surtain and a Denver Broncos defense that has shut down almost every number 1 wide receiver they faced, not Quentin Johnston, because, of course, who could ever shut down Quentin Johnston? How low do you rank one of the best wide receivers in fantasy when they're facing the best corner in fantasy? Where you see him here at 24 is just about where I've settled on him. I think if you're in a 2 wide receiver league, you're trying to get away from him. If you're in a 3 wide receiver league, you have to start him.
And my general operation is when a stud receiver takes on a stud cornerback, I lean toward the receiver. I just go with that. In this case, though, history plays a role. If you're a history major, maybe this will make you want to sit Garrett Wilson. He took on the Broncos 2022, 2023, 2024. He's never scored on them. He's never topped 54 yards on them. He's never had more than 5 catches in a game against them. And specifically, when he's been covered by Patrick Surtain, 10 targets, 5 catches, nothing good going on, 58 total yards. That's over 3 years of play against Patrick Surtain. That's tough.
If you're my doctor, I want a different surgeon if this is your operation, because I don't want to go against Patrick Surtain with Garrett Wilson. You mentioned it already. Jamar Chase did not play well in this situation. Michael Pittman did not play well in this situation. A.J. Brown did not play well in this situation. I think it's going to be tough for Garrett Wilson. He's a sit for me. You'll see that when we get to our starts and sits. The toughest player for me to rank is in the same game. It's Courtland Sutton taking on Sauce Gardner, who's done a very good job at limiting opposing wide receivers as well. Sutton also has been fantastic. He's been the go-to guy for Bo Nix. A very good sleeper for this week. I know Heath will agree. Troy Franklin, because he's going to be that second guy and the second receiver opposite the number 1 guy for facing the Jets. Calvin Austin in week 1. We saw it last week, I believe it was. I'm blanking. But it's happened a few times so far this season. The number 2 receiver opposite Sauce Gardner has done well facing the Jets, and I think Troy Franklin's an opportunity this week. I think Courtland Sutton's still a number 2 wide receiver, but not necessarily a slam dunk. I still would start him in 2 receiver leagues, but if you can't get away from him, that's probably the smart move to make. Let's go now to the start and sits for the wide receiver position. So, Dave, you got both Chargers wide receivers, at least 2 of the 3, not named Quentin Johnston. You got Keenan Allen and Ladd McConkey. How do you think they're going to do against the Dolphins defense that hasn't given up a lot of production to opposing wide receivers?
The reason why they haven't given up a lot of production, Jamey, is because teams have been able to run on them. And I don't think the Chargers, between their 3rd-string running backs and their depleted offensive line, are going to be able to run. And Justin Herbert, he'll be under pressure because of that offensive line. And when he's been under pressure, he looks for Keenan Allen and he looks for Ladd McConkey. And I think those 2 guys help make up what lacks in the run game for the LA Chargers. I still like Quentin Johnston the most, but all 3 of these wide receivers are top 24 options in PPR.
Heath, you like Chris Olave taking on that Patriots defense in the game between New Orleans and New England. How do you think he's going to do? Is he going to score? Is he going to get more than 50 yards receiving? Like, which Chris Olave shows up?
Yeah, I'm not sure if he's going to score, and he may not get more. He may not need more than 50 yards receiving to be a must-start wide receiver because he gets 10 to 12 targets every single week. And the Patriots' pass defense, I think you're going to be really careful looking at what they've done so far this year and thinking it's a good matchup. They've got Christian Gonzalez back. They've been much better. but I trust Kellen Moore to scheme Chris Olave up, move him around the formation, put him in motion, put him in the slot. He's going to see double-digit targets. There's a chance he also scores in the game. I was pretty impressed with the way Spencer Rattler played last week against the Giants. I think this game might be a little closer than people are thinking it's going to be. But when you have a guy that gets 10 targets almost every single week, you should just start that guy in full PPR.
In half and non, would you consider starting him?
Probably not start him in non-PPR. In half, he's a high-end wide receiver 3.
All right, so the sliding scale based on the format, but clearly he's done a nice job catching the ball. For me, it's going to be Tetairoa McMillan. He's going to get his first NFL touchdown in Week 6, taking on the Cowboys. They've been miserable against opposing wide receivers. McMillan is due. Now, we'll see if Jalen Coker returns this week. He's been able to practice. That's somebody I think can impact the Panthers. Maybe in a positive, though. Take a little pressure off of McMillan. He's gotten 8+ targets in every game so far this season, and this is the game where he's going to finally start to have that breakout performance. So I love McMillan as a top 15 wide receiver. Could potentially have the best game of his career to date. 16 PPR points so far has been his high. Maybe he cracks that 20-point per game range, 20-point threshold if he finally gets into the end zone. This is going to be a big game for the rookie for Carolina. Let's go now to the sits. We already talked about one of those guys for me, and that's Garrett Wilson. Heath, you guys I think differ on this a little bit because I think, Dave, you're a little bit more optimistic about Joe Flacco's influence on the Bengals and maybe Tee Higgins. But Heath, you're still staying away from Higgins in this game against.
So I'm the guy who was touting Jerry Jeudy all offseason and David Njoku all offseason because they were going to be playing with Joe Flacco. That was going to make things better.
Right.
I'm also the guy, but because of that, for the first month of the season, I watched a lot of the Browns. Yes, I've been gouging my eyes out.
Yikes.
Joe Flacco, the first month of this season is not the Joe Flacco that we saw a couple of years ago in Cleveland. He's not the guy slinging the ball down the field. Part of the problem is because the Browns' offensive line couldn't give him the time to do that. You know the only offensive line that's been graded as worse than the Browns' offensive line this year? It's the Bengals. I do think there's going to be a bunch of dump-offs to Chase Brown because Joe Flacco would like to live long enough to play through the next week. I just don't think he's the same guy. The offensive line is absolutely awful. Hopefully Tee Higgins scores a touchdown. That's your only hope.
I think Tee Higgins can score a touchdown because I think there's going to be no choice but for the Bengals to throw and play from behind against the Green Bay Packers. So I think volume wins the day. We've seen it now with Jamar Chase multiple times this season. We've seen it with Tee Higgins before, too. I think Chase is going to get more targets than Tee, but Tee Higgins can still have a decent game. So he's on the fence for me, low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3.
Now, would you be starting Tee Higgins over the guy that you say to sit, which is DK Metcalf?
I would, because I'm nervous about DK Metcalf in this specific situation against Joe Flacco's former team, the Browns. We know they love to put pressure on the quarterback. We know they play a lot of man coverage. And we know that when Aaron Rodgers is under pressure, he's getting rid of that ball quickly, and it generally does not go to DK Metcalf in that situation. And when it's man-to-man coverage, usually there's a blitz along with it, but even when there's not, it's not DK Metcalf that gets the ball there either. He's a flex. I like him as a number 3 wide receiver, but not as a top 24 guy.
Does it help that Calvin Austin is banged up? Does it help that the tight ends haven't really stepped up, that the run game could be sort of taken away here, that maybe Rodgers leans on Metcalf a little more?
No, I think it's going to be an ugly, low-scoring game between two teams with great defenses.
All right, so we'll see how things go for DK Metcalf there. We're going to take a break right now. When we come back and get into the tight ends that you need. This is actually a really good week for tight ends, which means they're going to be terrible. But at least we have optimism going into the week. We'll tell you about the guys that you should be starting and sitting at tight end next on FFT.